Добрий день, я вітаю всіх, хто
Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. My name is Olga Atamanova. It's my pleasure to see everybody joining us here online and in our studio. It's been 10 years of the war, and today is day 645 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. And today we have invited you to discuss a very interesting topic. Today we will be talking about Russian narratives that the aggressor country uses to perform their information war. We will be talking about weapons black market. Let me introduce our speakers today. Joining us are Anait Hoperia, head of the Department for Countering Information Threats to National Security at the Center for Countering Disinformation and the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. Also joining us are Svitlana Slipchenko, VoxCheck project manager, and Vadym Dzyubynskyi, head of the Criminal Investigation Department of the National Police of Ukraine. So, Ms. Anait, let's start with you. How did this narrative got created? How did it get so much reinforced in a public space? And what do we actually do about it? Good morning. Thank you. Well, talking about analytic report, we have to tell you that it was put together upon the research of the Russian misinformation campaign that was aiming at creating the narrative and reinforcing the narrative that Ukraine trades in weapons provided by the Western partners, and creation of an image of Ukraine as a main factor of destabilization in all the hotspots of the world. And as the aid was increasing, the Russians continued intensifying their narratives against us in all corners of the world. That's why we've decided to monitor, to analyze how it started. The methodology of this study was such that we were able to analyze almost 11,000 messages in Russian, Ukrainian, and other languages, starting from the 24th of February 2024 until the 16th of October 2023. In these slides we can see the number of contacts with the audience, the number of views, the number of publications, and I can say that as we were monitoring the target audience in different countries, we focused our attention on the comments, so what the discussion abroad was about in different corners of the world. So here is the timeline that you can see. We've divided it into a number of stages of our of the campaign and stages of our study. The campaign that, in our opinion, started with heating up of the narrative. So this is the way they do it. They first throw in some trigger things to start their large-scale campaign of psyops. So during narrative heat up, they were expressing certain vulnerabilities in different countries. Well, when they were discussing the supply of heavy weapons of Ukraine, and on the stage of preparation of campaign, well, roughly saying, we start from a study by Russia Today and a statement by Shoigu. And the next stage are those fakes that they continue trying to promote, and unfortunately some audiences eventually end up under the influence of those narratives. So RT, that started this avalanche of fakes that we have today, they started talking about the weapons black market in the summer 2022. They started with publishing a research or an investigation, and then before that a Bulgarian editorial with a reference to Russian Telegram channel published the following message: FDM Javelin is being sold online for $30,000. This is what ABC News shares on their Telegram channel. There is no way to prove this statement. However, ABC News references the page where the weapons are being sold, and this page is registered in Kiev, Ukraine. Then RT on the 1st of July publishes an investigation as if about the agreement to sell the Phoenix Ghost and a batch of American and anti-infantry landmines M18A1 Claymore. And they say if you can find other weapons in Ukrainian darknet, you're welcome to buy it. And what else is interesting here is this picture, for example. It was posted by a seller of Thief on darknet on the 9th of August 2022, and there was an ad like Switchblade is on sale. However, the picture itself was made in November 2015 in Syria, and as we see, the drone is damaged and is unfit for use. So those fakes were continuing being published, but being combined with the statement of Shoigu. I can quote what he said during the meeting of the Ministry of Defense. As we know, a part of Western equipment supplied to Europe is being disseminated in Middle Eastern markets and ends up in the black markets as well. And in his statements, there was a reference to investigation by RT, and we call it a dog whistle, a catalyst, when the government officials make a narrative, uniting it with some investigations from some channels, and it can be considered a start of a campaign, of a huge campaign. So what does it give us? After that, there is an article published in Financial Times on the 12th of July 2022 with the name NATO and EU are concerned about the risk of smuggling weapons by Ukraine, and it was saying that NATO and EU want to track the weapons that are being supplied to Ukraine, which is quite logical. But for the Russians, it's yet another reason to produce more fakes and fake statements. What's happening next? I wouldn't say it was a scandal, but it was some misunderstanding, miscommunication of Europol. The press secretary of Europol mentioned that there might have been cases of leakage of Western weapons, as if by smuggling from Ukraine, and the Western media started quoting that statement. However, Europol made a comment on that statement, and on the very next day they published a number, one statement with a number of messages. First of all, regarding Ukraine, the dissemination of the small arms and high explosives may increase the number of smuggled weapons ending up in European Union. The threat might exist, and it may even become larger after the end of the conflict. Europol also cooperates with the Ukrainian authorities and officials, decreasing the risk of smuggling weapons to European Union. I'm not going to quote everything, but we may say it's safe to state that by that statement Europol just assumed it, but at the same time they stated that they work with our government officials, they trust them, and they have documented no cases of such smuggling. After that, as we see, our partners from European Commission published an article on the 22nd October 2022 about the plan to regulate and monitor the provision of weapons from Europe and State Department of the United States. And Russia couldn't help but react to those statements, which are clear and right under conditions that we live in. And we can conditionally divide this Russians' reaction. First, on the 4th of November 2022, they started disseminating the news about the Western partners who decided to create the new command to oversee the training of the armed forces of Ukraine. And then, during the following stage, there was a video with our military saying that the top-level military command sell the weapons, and during that period we've registered the peaking of non-authentic behavior. They've created a lot of bots and who were using different statements, and they were also using different resources to spread these narratives further on. And then their favorite thing, the use of pseudo-experts, or so to say, not so loyal people. Unfortunately, John McIntyre, former foreign mercenary, he gave an interview, and he really was in our international legion for 4 months, and he provided information. You know, he was making Russian statement like the weapons are being sold to the black market, the Ukrainians called themselves Nazis, they kill the prisoners of war, they hide in the houses with the civilians, they sell all or steal all the American weapons. And according to the information that we have, this guy really was in the ranks of the international legion. He's a communist, he's a keen leftist, he's a part of a Western community called Tankists who is vulnerable to Russian propaganda. They justify the actions of Stalin, for example, or they glorify DPR and LPR. So roughly saying, he is a person who adds more legitimacy to Russian messages. And on top of that, there are other journalists who were given interviews on this topic during this specific period after the interview of this American mercenary. Irish RT correspondent Chibos, who was making statements in United Nations. Then Gerush, another American journalist who was making the similar statements containing the similar messages. So they started finding their people all around the place among those who can confirm such messages. So basically it's one of the tools of their propaganda. So what's positive? For example, a statement of European Commissioner on the Internal Affairs. Her interview was published in Reuters, and the following things were stated there. We haven't documented any cases of smuggling of armed weapons from Ukraine. Those people who were trying to smuggle were mostly those who were trying to smuggle weapons as the trophies or for personal protection, and obviously they were detained in the border. Well, it was not so much of a disappointment, but a little bit of a minus that this statement was not so widely disseminated as Russian fakes. So, of course, Russians use all resources possible to spread their misinformation messages. Meanwhile, this statement in a reputed media with a top-level official who knows what they're talking about. And unfortunately, this statement again was not so widely disseminated. Then I would like to focus a little bit of attention on the analysis of target audience, because we were finding fakes in different countries, in Mexico, France, Hamas, and elsewhere. We all know I apologize, in Gaza Strip, I meant them by Hamas. And analyzing the target audience, we've analyzed 22 countries, almost 22 languages and comments. And what I can say that among those mentioned during this campaign, the Russians obviously specifically were trying to target different countries, different audiences during the summer 22, summer 23. On this slide we can see the countries that were targeted by Russia. However, the most resilient were Great Britain, Germany, Japan, China, Korea, Finland, Norway and Canada. In this map you can see the degree of influence. Marked in red are those countries which were most vulnerable to Russian information fakes, who were more vulnerable to the effect of this information campaign about the weapons black market, and marked in blue are those who were more resilient. So talking about targeting, we can divide it into a number of stages as well. When they realized that within 2 weeks war would not be over and our partners will continue providing weapons, continue providing support, they started transforming their messages. So in the beginning there were fakes about different SAMs and small arms, but on the following stage the publications mentioned the mortar systems and heavy weapons already. And as of the summer 2023, we document mentioning of all types of weapons which is being provided by our partners. And why some countries did not react to messages like that? We can say that the countries with an absent weapons culture and with a high level of trust to government institutions were resilient to such messages, and those undergoing through some social crises or those who have high activity of criminal groups were more vulnerable to this narrative. And generally, I would like to summarize that if we analyze these campaigns that our center has already published while being present here, about the weapons black market, about black transplantology, about abduction of children, we see that Russia is creating a strategic narrative that Ukraine is a black market itself, that it's an unreliable partner, and in this sense we have to work more intensely because this strategic narrative is going to develop. So that's it on my part. Thank you very much, Ms. Svitlana. Do you agree with such perceptions of those narratives? And on top of that, there is a feeling that with the beginning of the war between Israel and Hamas, this narrative got a second life. And is it so? Thank you for your question. Let me start with our observations from our studies. Well, in fact, they coincide to the certain extent with what Anait was talking about. So we were studying Telegram channels, we were studying ties between Russian and pro-Russian channels, and this is where we identify this narrative about Ukraine selling Western weapons to the black markets. the first publications of this narrative, they emerged back on the 28th of February 2022. I think this is what Anait called the heating up of this narrative, the testing whether it will be perceived well by audience or not, and we see that the audience perceived it pretty well, so they started developing it, and there were next waves in March, April, and then all the way until the summer 2022. It was quite an active narrative of Russian propaganda. And even regardless the fact that we started our analysis with Russian and pro-Russian Telegram channels, then we've seen that the narrative is going beyond the Russian information space and beyond Ukrainian information space, where Russia tries to influence it. And then in July July last year, there is an article on Financial Times that repeats the narratives of Russian propaganda, which was quite surprising because Financial Times is quite a reputed media. They have a high quality of facts, and it was quite unexpected to see statements about smuggling of Western weapons there. We assume that such an article is a result of Russian information campaigns and the influence of Russia, influence of the way Russia promoted their narrative not only in Ukrainian media space but also abroad. If we pay more attention to the article of Financial Times, the problems were at the level of the heading that was like this: European Union is concerned with the smuggling of weapons from Ukraine. And a little bit later, Financial Times changed the header and they said NATO and EU are concerned about the risk of smuggling of weapons from Ukraine. And this one single word, risk, already changed the essence significantly, the meaning. But the fact that Financial Times were changing their header without communicating to the readers, also the article contained comments of the people and the anonymous sources of information which are impossible to identify, and it's unclear who was disseminating this information and with which goal. And talking about Europol, Financial Times used the statements of Europol dated April about the investigation of Europol, during which they identified that the smuggling of weapons from Ukraine started to the European market to supply the weapons to the organized crime groups. And this Europol article just does not exist. We were looking for it, and in April they published no such articles. As we've seen later, Europol made a statement after this article of Financial Times that was then debunked and explained and clarified. So in no sources of Europol there were any mentions of facts of smuggling of weapons from Ukraine. There were statements about the fact that the war in Ukraine will create more risks and opportunities for fraud, for crime, but it was not about smuggling of weapons. And the fact that such article appears in Financial Times is a result of the development of this narrative by Russian propaganda even earlier, back in spring, in Russian and pro-Russian Telegram channels. And talking about pro-Russian Telegram channels, those which mimic Ukrainians but are not such in reality, this topic was covered mostly by Legitimny, Ukraine.ru and Resident. Those channels were providing details to the messages about the presumable sale of or smuggling of weapons from Ukraine. They added different names of the people who were presumably aware better of such details, and they were also providing the insights, a method that no one can verify. So talking about the goal of this narrative, our opinions coincide about what those narratives are from. To create an image of Ukraine as unreliable partner who cannot properly use the weapons provided by the Western partners, hence the weapons should not be provided anymore. And on top of that, the messages were also used to discredit the Ukrainian government officials as if they are corrupted and they cannot comply with their obligations. And also the messages tried to discredit Ukrainian military because those fake weapons about the sale of the Western weapons to the black markets abroad were made presumably on behalf of Ukrainian military. Talking about the way this narrative was spread across Europe, according to our study in 6 countries, Hungary, Slovakia, Italy, Poland, Czech Republic, and Germany, within a year until the summer 2023, we've documented 225 messages about presumable smuggling of Western weapons from Ukraine. And what's noticeable that among all of the fake narratives, the most misinformation was aimed at Poland, and those about smuggling of Western weapons were aimed at Czech Republic. Almost third part of all the statements within the last year and a half. Poland is in the second place with a quarter of statements, and then 15% are with Germany and Slovakia, and the last are Germany and Hungary. So we cannot say that that narrative was one of the biggest that Russia was trying to promote for Western audience, but it was present as a part of a narrative that Ukraine is unreliable partner, as Ukraine should not be provided any more aid because Ukraine cannot properly use it. So the active campaigns of Russian propaganda, as we observe, they increased their efforts in the year 23 compared to year 2022, specifically in context of European countries. And we see that the peaks of the campaigns fall on the periods of elections in those countries. We think that Russia will reinforce its efforts on discrediting of Ukraine closer to the elections in European Parliament in 2024. And even regardless of the fact that many fakes were already produced with use of different sources and methods, Russia will not discard this topic. They will continue using it, and as a proof of it really was the situation between Israel and Hamas, when Russia for an umpteenth time revived that narrative, stating that that was the specific black market Ukraine was selling the Western weapons to. And in this case, the main Directorate of Intelligence worked quite well as Center for Counter and Misinformation, all the government authorities and agencies which identified that this campaign may exist, and they warned Ukrainians that on the background of the war between Israel and Hamas, this narrative may arrange again about the black market of weapons, that Ukraine replenishes with the weapons obtained from the Western partners. Well, the forecast came true, but we were already warned. But even regardless of that, Russia did not dismiss its efforts, and they continued trying to find more pseudo testimonies about the Western weapons popping up either with Hamas or Israel. But every time those proofs are fabricated, there's the photos used outside the photos, or completely fabricated unsubstantiated statements and other traditional methods of Russian propaganda that they use in many narratives, just like in this one. Thank you very much, Ms. Svitlana. So, Mr. Vadym, let's talk about what's really going on with the illegal circulation of weapons through the prism of criminal investigations that you were able to document. Well, thank you for this opportunity to inform everybody. Well, I would like to start first not with the number of seized small arms, but rather with the facts about smuggling of weapons to European countries, and not only to European but to other countries as well. With the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we continue seeing the attempts of Russia to produce more facts about illegal smuggling of weapons, and Ukraine being a black market of illegal weapons circulation. It's clear that our European partners are concerned about the risk of leak of weapons from Ukraine. It's clear that we have a growth of illegal circulation of weapons inside the country, first of all, and it's well, it's conditioned by the war. It's very logical. But I would like to convince you that we are in close cooperation with the law enforcement agencies of all European countries, with Europol, with international organizations which deal with the illegal circulation of weapons, CMES, Impact, Frontex, and others. We continue having meetings with them, joint events. On top of that, we plan to create a joint information center in Ukraine on illegal circulation of weapons, which will include the representatives of police departments of different countries of European Union for operational exchange of information about the circulation of weapons, both legal and illegal. For the time being, on Monday or Tuesday, we will have a meeting in Lviv with the representatives of law enforcement agencies in Lviv, where we received for once again information and confirmation that there was no single fact documented on circulation of weapons that was leaking from Ukraine. Well, there are single facts of seizure of small arms in the border with the European Union, but there were no military specimens of weapons. Mostly they were small arms for rubber bullets, and people were just trying to smuggle it for the purposes of personal protection. So it has no systemic nature, which once again proves that there is no smuggling of weapons from Ukraine. So we cannot talk about any smuggling on industry scale. Well, we cannot talk even about single cases of smuggling, let alone industry scale. Well, talking about illegal circulation of weapons inside the country, all the law enforcement agencies realize the adequate risks that we are facing now and those that we may face after the end of the war, after our victory. We clearly realize that the amount of weapons that are circulating inside of the country now, well, they can be switched to illegal circulation. This is why countering the illegal circulation of weapons is a priority for all the law enforcement agencies of the state. If you see this information on the slide, currently the National Police of Ukraine seized 4,793 units of small arms. Half of them are automatic, 1,000 is pistols, and almost 17,000 grenades. This is the data as of the for the year 2023, from the beginning to the end, to almost the end of year 2023. The information as of year 2022 is almost similar, just a little bit different. So basically we can see that law enforcement agencies continue working on seizing the weapons that can be used for committing any crimes in the territory of Ukraine. Now let's talk about the methods of countering the illegal circulation of weapons. First is the blockposts. The blockposts don't only work for documents inspection, but also to prevent the weapons from the area of battle operations and from coming to Ukraine, and from Ukraine to other countries. We have 330 blog posts all across our country. And within the year 2023, we've identified 887 persons who were trying to illegally transport the weapons from one territory to another. We've seized 374 units of such arms, 2,500 grenades, and almost 200,000 shells. Well, I want to convince you that among those arms, there are no arms provided by our partners. Those are mostly trophy, small arms, or arms left by the occupiers after the occupation. That was a Russian standard arms, or even the Soviet standard arms. Sometimes we find some single cases of, for example, seizure of foreign grenades. So those are the single cases that don't have any systemic nature. As to the criminal investigations, more than 5,000 criminal cases were added to pre-court investigations register. In 3,756 cases, we've served notice of suspicion to those persons, and out of those, 3,204 were already brought to the court, and they await to be investigated by the court. Another problem that we stumble upon are the reserves where the weapons are being stored. Well, they were prepared by the saboteur groups, and the persons who were preparing Ukraine to the war with Russia. As you can see, it's not those are not the places along the border. They are located all around Ukraine. Those places were prepared all across Ukraine long before the beginning of the full-scale invasion to support the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. Currently, we've identified 113 such reserves in our country, where we found a lot of almost 70,000 cartridges, 5,500 other types of ammunition, almost 1,500 grenades, and other high explosives. And police continues working on identification of such facilities, and all those arms being seized by our law enforcement agencies is being handed over to the armed forces of Ukraine to be used in the battlefield. And this is exactly the way that we prevent it from being back in illegal circulation once again. So talking about misinformation and fakes by Russia, we realize the risks that sometime a weapon may emerge in Ukraine that they may say ended up over there in Europe from Ukraine after being smuggled. So now, after all those units of weapons, 600,000 that we documented in Ukraine, it's all registered, and all of our European partners are aware of those arms. If this one of those arms emerges somewhere in Europe, we understand that it's a fake, it's a misinformation, it's the work of Russian Federation to discredit Ukraine. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Do we have any questions on the floor? Good morning, Ukrinform. You've mentioned that in European Union they started spreading narratives about illegal sale of weapons from Ukraine to European black markets. Did those narratives influence the public sentiment in Europe? Thank you for the question. Well, we can say that this campaign is quite moderate compared to other ones, so we cannot say that it's something that they continue talking about all the time, because as Mr. Vadym has said, that there's a lot of work to prevent it. However, we still have negative cases, like in Mexico, for example. One journalist said that, look, we've got weapons, javelin, but it was not a javelin, but 84 grenade launcher that is in mass production. It could not end up there from Ukraine. And that information vacuum that was created there, and all the Spanish-speaking media, even the neutral ones, they started using it, you know, even without understanding the difference. And the embassy of Russian Federation reacted right away. They made a statement that Kiev regime is using the weapons that they sell, that they get from the Western partners and stuff like that. So in cases like that, yes, if we don't communicate, that narrative may be developing, but on our part, we take all reasonable efforts not to make it happen. So before publishing this investigation, we've gathered all the military attaches of countries of NATO. We've made this study in English, and we've gathered them all to tell them what's going on. So the work is underway, and thanks to the efforts of everybody, the Ministry of Interior and public organizations, civil organizations, government institutions and agencies, this campaign is moderate. But again, I agree with Svitlana that next year this campaign will be reinforced. This is why we try to proactively do our work. Now we have more questions. Yulia Makarenko, Belsat, Polish television. Mr. Vadym, talking about the small arms, what are the categories of cases that they were identified? Is it manufacturing, dissemination, or sale of weapons? Well, we mostly talk about the illegal storage and transportation of weapons. We don't talk about manufacturing because we have some single facts of not even the manufacturing, but rather modding of weapons from the gas weapons, so that those are not the types of arms that are used during battle operations. We talk about seizure of small arms from illegal circulation. So people either store it or transport it or conceal it with different purposes. I cannot say that people had the arms en masse in Ukraine. No, I cannot say so. There are no systemic cases like that. But it's mostly storage of weapons for the case of resistance. People store, for example, small arms in Kiev region just in case Russians come back here. So this is why I keep this machine gun or a gun here that was brought to me by a friend who was coming from the occupied territories, like AK-12, for example, gun or rifle, which is Russian standard weapon. So we're talking mostly about illegal, not even sale, but rather storage and transportation of weapon. A couple of more words. The Ministry of Interior came up with the suggestion of amendments to the legislation that would provide the citizens with opportunity to declare the weapons that they store for the purposes of self-protection, for the purposes of resistance in terms of repeated invasion of the territories they reside in. Do we have any statistics of the small arms on the hands of the civilians before the full-scale invasion? Of course, we have such statistics. Before the full-scale invasion, in our information system of National Police of Ukraine, before the full-scale invasion, there were legally registered 1,334,100 units of small arms owned by the individuals and legal entities. Obviously, a lot of such weapons fell under the category of lost or stolen after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Also, the arms that were stored with the law enforcement agencies, other units, they are all documented in our registers as either stored, stolen, or lost. Thank you very much for this important discussion. We understand that Russian propaganda is not stopping there. They will rather be reinforcing, and we hope that in this case we will be all ready to counter this type of operations that is on par with other operations going on in the battlefield. Thank you very much. We'll continue in just a couple of minutes. We will be talking about blocking of borders. Let's continue working together for our victory, and let's thank our security and defense forces. Glory to Ukraine.
Дякую.